What if the very thing you are trying so hard to hold on to is the very thing destroying your peace? We spend our lives tightening our grip on people, on outcomes, on the image we desperately want the world to believe about us. We tell ourselves that if we can just control enough, if we can manage every word, every move, every possibility, then we will finally feel safe. But here's the truth. The more you control, the more you suffer. Because life was never designed to be controlled. It was meant to be experienced, like a river, flowing, changing, unpredictable. And yet, we dam it up, forcing it into walls of our own making, wondering why we feel so exhausted, so restless, so full of anxiety. Deep down, you already know this. Control is an illusion. You can command appearances. You can orchestrate performances. You can even manipulate others for a time. But the cost is heavy. Your joy, your spontaneity, your soul. So ask yourself, what are you really afraid of losing? Is it the approval of others? The safety of certainty? Or is it simply the terror of admitting you are not, and will never be, in complete control? We live under the illusion that control is a form of strength, that the more we can dictate and manage, the more powerful we become. From childhood, we are taught that certainty is the prize, that if we can just predict outcomes and eliminate risk, we will finally feel secure. Society celebrates the one who appears in command, the leader who makes no mistakes, the individual who always seems ahead of life's chaos. Yet what we call control often masks a deep, trembling fear. Fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of being powerless in a world that will never promise us guarantees. It's not strength that drives this obsession, it's fragility dressed in armor. We don't realize that by trying to master everything outside of us, we become slaves to forces we can never truly conquer. The weather shifts, people leave, plans collapse, accidents happen, and time, the greatest force of all, never obeys. The irony is that our desperate grasp for control magnifies our suffering because we measure ourselves against the impossible, demanding that a life built on unpredictability bend perfectly to our will. The tragedy is that control feels so rational, so necessary. We tell ourselves, if I don't hold everything together, it will all fall apart. This thought traps us in constant vigilance, always anticipating danger, always rehearsing imaginary outcomes that rarely arrive. Instead of living, we're preparing. Instead of feeling, we're calculating. Even love is not spared. We try to manage how others see us, how they respond, what they feel. But the more we engineer affection, the less authentic it becomes, because love only breathes in freedom. Relationships built on control suffocate under invisible chains. Friends, partners, even children can feel when affection is conditional, when trust is replaced with silent manipulation. And yet we keep clinging, convinced that if we let go, chaos will consume us. But the truth is, chaos is not created by letting go. It is revealed by our refusal to trust what already is. History and philosophy remind us that even the most powerful rulers were haunted by this same delusion. Machiavelli wrote about the ruler who governs by fear, believing it guarantees obedience. But fear builds only temporary stability, a fragile order waiting to crack. When people comply out of force, they quietly plot their rebellion. When life is controlled through fear, it silently resists, breaking open in ways we could never predict. The same applies internally, when we govern our own souls through fear, forcing ourselves to never fail, never falter, never be weak. We build a fragile empire inside. On the outside, we may look disciplined and in control, but inside, anxiety brews, anger festers, and exhaustion grows. A fortress built on fear always crumbles from within. What looks like strength is actually brittleness. What appears as order is just the silence before collapse, and in chasing this illusion, we sacrifice the peace that comes not from control, but from resilience, the ability to bend, adapt, and trust. Psychologically, control is a coping mechanism. It emerges from the brain's ancient need to protect itself from threats. When the unknown feels dangerous, control promises certainty. But this survival instinct has been stretched far beyond its natural purpose. We no longer just plan for survival. We strategize every interaction, overthink every decision, obsess over every possible risk. Instead of protection, control becomes a prison. Neuroscience even shows how constant attempts to micromanage life activate stress responses in the body. keeping us in fight or flight mode even when no danger is present. Our bodies become battlegrounds of tension, our minds restless theaters of what-ifs. This is not strength, it is fragility on repeat. Real strength would allow stillness, a body not clenched, a mind not overrun. Yet we avoid this vulnerability because it feels unsafe to let life unfold without our constant interference. Control whispers that without it we are doomed, but the deeper truth is that with it, we are drained. Modern culture feeds this illusion of control by glorifying productivity, perfection, and image. We are taught that every detail must be optimized, every weakness concealed, every goal achieved. We curate our lives for an audience, polishing the surface to convince others, and ourselves, that everything is under control. Social media magnifies this, rewarding the appearance of mastery, while hiding the cost behind the screen, the sleepless nights, the anxiety attacks, the quiet despair. Control becomes performance, and performance becomes identity. We become actors trapped in a role we can never leave, terrified of the moment the mask slips. But masks are heavy, and the weight always shows. No matter how carefully we polish the image, the human heart cannot be tricked into peace. Beneath the perfection is a truth we keep suppressing. Life is uncontrollable, and so are we. Even in spirituality and self-improvement, control sneaks in, disguised as discipline. We read books, follow routines, and repeat affirmations, believing we can sculpt ourselves into unbreakable beings. And while growth and discipline have value, when driven by fear, they become just another form of control. Instead of liberating us, they chain us to impossible ideals. We think we are seeking transformation, but often we are just trying to erase our humanity. We want a life where nothing hurts, where nothing surprises us, where nothing slips through our fingers. But to seek a life without uncertainty is to seek a life without living. What we call control is often just avoidance. Avoidance of failure, avoidance of pain, avoidance of truth. But the very things we avoid are the ones that shape us, teach us, expand us. Without loss, we wouldn't know love. Without uncertainty, there is no courage. Without risk, there is no real joy. At its core, the obsession with control reveals our misunderstanding of freedom. We think freedom comes from ordering the world until it obeys us, from bending reality into something predictable. But freedom does not come from holding everything still. Freedom comes from moving gracefully with what changes. A bird is free not because it controls the sky, but because it surrenders to the wind. A river is free not because it controls its course, but because it flows regardless of obstacles. The more we resist this truth, the heavier life feels, because we are fighting against the nature of existence itself. Control is a losing battle, not because we are weak, but because reality was never meant to be mastered. And the longer we chase this illusion, the further we drift from the peace we crave, the peace that comes not from tightening our grip, but from loosening it. There is a moment we all know, though we rarely admit it. It's that silent desperation when you try to shape how someone feels about you, bending yourself into an image you think they'll love. You choose your words carefully, hide the pieces of yourself that might not be accepted, and force a smile when your heart feels heavy. For a while, it works. They respond the way you wanted. They give you approval, attention, even affection. You do what you do to protect your own image. When you feel excluded, weighted, but deep inside, it never feels whole, because what they love is not fully you, but the version you created to control the outcome. And when they eventually drift, as people often do, the loss cuts deeper, because you realize they never really knew the real you. The pain isn't just their absence. It's the betrayal you committed against yourself, all in the name of control. That's when it becomes clear. Control never guarantees love. It only ensures that what you receive will always feel fragile, artificial, and conditional. Think of the times you tried to control the future. You built meticulous plans, checked every possibility, imagined every outcome. You told yourself that preparation would bring peace, that nothing could surprise you if you were ready. But instead of calm, you found exhaustion. The more you tried to master every variable, the less present you became. Days blurred into strategies, nights dissolved into worries, and life itself felt suspended. And when the unexpected inevitably arrived, A sudden loss, a change you never predicted. You realized all your control bought you nothing. The pain came anyway, and worse, you had already lived through it 100 times in your imagination. Control doesn't shield you from suffering. It forces you to suffer before the suffering even begins. This is why we feel restless, even in quiet moments, because we are always rehearsing tragedies that may never come, all while missing the joy that is already here. There's another kind of suffering in control, the subtle one that comes with image, the curated life, the polished persona, the endless effort to make sure no one sees the cracks. You post the photos, you laugh at the right moments, you wear the clothes that speak of confidence and stability. On the outside, people might envy you. They might even believe you are unshakable, but when the lights are off and the phone screen fades to black, there's that familiar emptiness, the hollowness of knowing the performance is not real. You are alone with the truth you've hidden, and it whispers that no amount of likes or validation can fill the gap between who you are and who you pretend to be. This is the silent suffering of control, living life as an actor in your own story, never allowing yourself the risk of being seen as you truly are, and therefore never experiencing the relief of being loved without masks. Maybe you know the pain of controlling others, trying to keep them close so they never leave. You call it care, you call it protection, but beneath it lies fear, the fear of abandonment. So you tighten your grip. You ask constant questions, you demand reassurance, you monitor their moods. Like a storm, you must predict. But the tighter you hold, the further they drift. Love suffocates under the weight of suspicion. Trust erodes under the demand for certainty. And one day, despite all your efforts, the very thing you feared happens. They walk away. And you're left with the unbearable realization that your attempt to keep them close pushed them further than freedom ever would have. In that moment, it becomes clear that control does not keep love safe. It breaks it apart, piece by piece, until nothing is left but resentment and exhaustion. And then there are the moments when control collapses entirely. A sudden phone call in the middle of the night, a diagnosis you never saw coming, a betrayal that cuts deeper than words. These are the moments that strip away the illusion. No matter how careful you were, no matter how strong your grip, life moves as it wills. At first the collapse feels unbearable, like the ground has disappeared beneath your feet, but often, in the ruins of control, something shifts. There is a strange, quiet liberation in realizing that you never had the power you thought you did. For the first time, you can breathe without the burden of carrying a world you were never meant to hold. Painful as it is, collapse often plants the seeds of transformation because it exposes the truth that control was never safety. It was only a cage. Think of those rare moments when you actually let go, the night you laughed until tears fell, not caring how you looked, the conversation where you spoke your truth, trembling but unfiltered, the day you left the plan behind and let the road take you somewhere unexpected. What did you feel? Freedom. Aliveness, a sense of connection not just to others but to yourself. These are the moments when life reveals its beauty, not in perfection but in unpredictability. They don't happen when you're in control. They happen when you surrender. That's why the memories that stay with you are rarely the ones you scripted. They are the unplanned encounters, the spontaneous choices, the imperfections that turned into treasures. They remind you that control was never the path to joy. It was the obstacle keeping you from it. And perhaps the deepest suffering of control is the way it blinds us to trust. Trust in ourselves, trust in others, trust in life itself. When we control, we are saying, I don't trust. I don't trust that I can survive heartbreak. I don't trust that others can love me as I am. I don't trust that life, in its chaos, could still hold meaning. But imagine the opposite. Imagine a life where you trusted enough to release the grip. You would still face storms, but you would no longer live in fear of them. You would still feel pain, but you would not torture yourself with the illusion that it could have been avoided. You would finally see that suffering was never the enemy. It was the control that magnified it, sharpened it, and made it unbearable. And in that realization lies the beginning of freedom. There comes a point when the endless effort to control finally wears you down. You grow tired of chasing perfection, of monitoring every outcome, of pretending to be invincible. Exhaustion forces you to pause, and in that pause something unexpected happens. You notice a silence inside yourself that had been buried beneath the noise. At first it feels uncomfortable, like a void you want to fill. But if you sit with it long enough, you realize that silence is not emptiness. It is space, and within that space you begin to see yourself without judgment, without masks, without the weight of other people's expectations. It is not the kind of strength the world celebrates, loud, polished, commanding. It is a quieter strength, the kind that does not depend on control at all. It is the realization that you can let go and still remain whole. In solitude, you discover that you are not as fragile as you once believed. The very storms you feared, the heartbreaks, the failures, the endings, become evidence of your endurance. You survived the nights you thought would break you. You carried scars, yes, but those scars are not shameful. They are proof of your resilience. They tell the story of someone who fell, who struggled, who bled, and who still stands. Control promised safety, but it was your ability to rise again that gave you true power. Inner strength is not found in preventing wounds. It is born in surviving them. And when you finally see your scars not as flaws but as emblems of survival, you realize you are stronger than any illusion control could have offered. Light begins to take on a different meaning. It is no longer the spotlight of attention or validation from others. It is the gentle light that enters through the cracks when you stop sealing them shut. It is the quiet glow of authenticity, the warmth that spreads when you no longer hide your truth. This light does not demand performance. It demands honesty. And the more honest you become with yourself, with others, the brighter it grows. The brighter, suddenly you no longer need to manipulate, to beg, to prove. You shine not because you control the world's perception of you, but because you are no longer afraid of being seen as you are. The light is not in the perfection of your image, but in the freedom of your presence. With this awakening comes a new relationship to solitude. What once felt like loneliness now feels like sanctuary. You realize you do not need constant validation, constant company, or constant distraction to feel worthy. Solitude becomes the place where you remember yourself, where you gather strength, where you reconnect with the deepest truths that get lost in the noise of the world. In that solitude, self-worth blooms, not because anyone has given it to you, but because you finally stopped bargaining for it. You are no longer a beggar at the door of other people's approval. You are the keeper of your own value, and no one can take that away. Solitude ceases to be a punishment and becomes a sacred space where your soul breathes freely. This awakening also teaches you that surrender is not weakness, as you once believed. The open hand is stronger than the clenched fist, not because it controls more, but because it receives more. When you release your grip, life flows in ways you could never have orchestrated. Opportunities appear not through manipulation, but through trust. Love deepens, not through control, but through freedom. Even pain becomes bearable because it no longer feels like failure, it feels like part of the human experience. Surrender does not erase difficulty, it transforms your relationship to it. Instead of fighting reality, you begin to move with it, like a dancer moving with music rather than forcing the rhythm. Strength is no longer about domination. It is about harmony. The awakening reveals that worth was never meant to be earned. From the beginning, it was always within you, buried beneath layers of fear, comparison, and performance. You spent years trying to prove yourself to others, to control how they saw you, to win their acceptance. And yet, when all the masks fall away, when all the performances end, what remains is the simplest truth. You are enough as you are. This is not the kind of worth that rises and falls with achievements or validation. It is unconditional, unshakable, and immovable. It is the quiet realization that you do not need to do more, be more, or control more to deserve your place in this world. And perhaps the most beautiful part of this awakening is that it frees you from fear. Fear of rejection, fear of loss, fear of failure. These no longer dictate your choices because you no longer tie your identity to outcomes you cannot control. You begin to live with a new kind of courage, not the absence of fear, but the willingness to walk through it without needing guarantees. This courage is born from knowing that even if the world rejects you, even if plans collapse, even if love ends, you will still remain whole. For your worth is not fragile, your strength is not borrowed, and your light does not depend on control. It was always within you, waiting for the moment you stopped trying to control life and finally allowed yourself to live it. The truth settles in quietly at first. The more you control, the more you suffer. It is not a grand revelation, not a thunderous awakening, but a whisper that lingers after all your attempts to grasp at certainty have left you weary. You begin to see how much energy has been wasted fighting against the unpredictable nature of life, how much peace was sacrificed in the endless pursuit of guarantee. Control never delivered what it promised, it only fed the cycle of fear. And when you finally step back even for a moment, you notice that freedom was never outside of you. It was always waiting in the space where control loosened its grip. In that awareness, the weight you have carried for years begins to dissolve. Not because the world has changed, but because your relationship to it has. The revolution you once sought in rearranging circumstances begins instead within your own mind, in the choice to let life unfold without demanding that it obey your will. This is the real revolution, not conquering the world, but reclaiming yourself. We are told that power lies in how many people listen to us, how many victories we win, how many outcomes we can shape. But history has shown again and again that those who seek control over others often lose control over themselves. Their kingdoms crumble, their reputations rot, their empires fade. Outward domination is fleeting, but inner transformation endures. The one who learns to let go, to meet uncertainty with courage rather than resistance, is freer than any ruler sitting on a throne. You cannot legislate the chaos out of life, but you can choose how you stand within it. You can choose peace over panic, authenticity over image, presence over fear. This is the quiet rebellion that no force outside of you can take away, because it is rooted not in appearances, but in your very being. When you understand this, suffering no longer frightens you in the same way. You stop seeing it as a punishment or a failure, and begin to recognize it as part of the rhythm of living. Suffering is inevitable, but suffering magnified by control is not. The heartbreak will still come. The loss will still sting, the failure will still hurt, but without the added burden of control, the pain moves through you instead of consuming you. It becomes a teacher instead of a tyrant. You start to see that joy and sorrow are not opposites, but companions. One deepens the other, and both remind you that you are alive. Control blinds you to this truth, convincing you that safety lies in avoidance. But life is not meant to be avoided, it is meant to be felt. And when you let yourself feel fully, without trying to script the outcome, you find that even suffering has beauty, because it shapes you into someone real, someone unbreakable in spirit, even when broken in body or heart. The call is not to abandon responsibility or to live recklessly. Letting go is not the same as carelessness. It is the shift from domination to trust, from forcing to flowing. You still work, still dream, still love, but without strangling life with your expectations. You begin to live with open hands, knowing that some things will slip away, but others will arrive in their place. You recognize that freedom does not mean controlling every detail. It means being present for every moment, even when it does not look the way you imagined. Control narrows your life into rigid pathways. Surrender opens it to infinite possibilities. And when you release the need to dictate every step, life often surprises you with beauty you would have missed had you been too focused on clinging. This is the paradox of surrender. What you feared losing was never truly yours, and what you gain by letting go is far greater than what control could have offered. The revolution of inner transformation is the only one that endures. The world may not notice it. There are no headlines when a person finally stops controlling and starts living. But it is in this quiet revolution that the deepest change happens. You no longer measure yourself by outcomes, by others, by performances. You measure yourself by the depth of your presence, the honesty of your choices, the freedom of your soul. You realize that no amount of control will make you immortal, but letting go will make your life meaningful. The years you once spent rehearsing, pretending, and fearing begin to feel like a distant dream because you are no longer surviving through illusion. You are living in truth. This revolution does not need to be declared. It only needs to be embodied, and when it is, you move differently. You love without chains. You work without fear. You exist without apology. And so the invitation is simple, but not easy. Let go. Not of responsibility, not of care, but of the illusion that you can bend reality into perfect shape. Trust the river of life to carry you, even when it runs through darkness. Trust that you are strong enough to face the storms without controlling their arrival. Trust that your worth is not dependent on outcomes, but inherent in your very existence. The more you release, the lighter you become, until even silence feels like a companion, and solitude feels like a gift. This is where true freedom lives, not in the tightening of fists, but in the opening of hands. The revolution you have been waiting for is not out there in the world. It is in the courage to stop controlling and to finally live with all the honesty, all the vulnerability, and all the strength of your soul.